Hello everyone, the Nerdy Steve here, and today we will be talking about my favorite deck in a really long time, and it is an Alchemy Blood Sacrifice deck that I've been using and that I built. And Alchemy is important right now because this upcoming weekend is the qualifier weekend where it is Alchemy only. And right now I am at rank number 17 on the ladder, so I've been using this deck a lot, and today I wanted to go over the deck specifically and talk about some of the deck building decisions and general the cards in it. And then over the week we'll play a couple of games and I'll do some more in-depth gameplay videos. If you want to see some really good videos though, you can go to twitch.tv/thenerdysteve and look at my VODs from this past week. And I had an 8-hour stream yesterday, and all I played was this deck, and it went really well. I went 20-3, and you should go watch those if you want some gameplay. But right now we're just gonna go talk about the deck. So let's go. So what does this deck do? It is a very low to the ground and kind of combo-y mid-range deck. We want to use Sanguine Brushstroke, which creates a Blood Artist and a Blood to generate a really big board state where we can then just sacrifice a couple blood tokens in a single turn and sacrifice a couple of creatures to drain with Blood Artists and kill our opponent. Now, the Sanguine Brushstroke combos with a lot of different things in this deck because, so we also have a lot of blood. So we have Voldaren Epicure and Bloodtithe Harvester. These are both creatures that, create blood when they enter the battlefield. The Voldaren Epicure deals damage when it does that, and the Bloodtithe Harvester can then use that blood to help it kill bigger creatures. So against mono green decks or, really anything, it can be used to tap itself to kill another thing. But both of these cards generate blood, and that is important because with Sanguine Brushstroke, whenever any blood is sacrificed, you make an opponent lose 1 life. And that's why we play 4 Epicures and 4 Bloodtithe Harvesters, or why I put them in this deck, because you want that redundancy and that reliability of the blood tokens, because our deck is really focused on draining our opponent. If you have 2 or 3 Sanguine Brushstrokes out, every time you activate a blood, you are just dealing so much damage to your opponent. And as we talk about with the Epicures and the Harvester, right? That blood, what it does is it filters away cards in your hand to get you closer to another Sanguine Brushstroke or other really important parts of this deck. And so that's where you can start to see everything come together, is that the deck has a really nice way of smoothing its draws, because if you ever have extra mana and extra card in hand, you're going to reliably have blood to draw into something relevant. And with that, we also have the Deadly Dispute, which it doesn't create blood, it creates a treasure. But Deadly Dispute is a way it can sacrifice blood, which can, works well with the Sanguine Brushstroke. If you want to, save mana or time, sometimes you just need to Deadly Dispute away a blood token instead of waiting for a land or waiting to have that 1 mana available for the land. Sometimes you just need to draw cards right away, and you can't afford to filter. And so Deadly Dispute does stuff with, excess blood tokens lying around. It can also sacrifice, Shambling Ghast or Experimental Synthesizer or even a Voldaren Epicure. And again, what this deck is doing is it's so efficient and low to the ground, for the most part, that, you can just Deadly Dispute and then immediately cast what you find, or find really good things to do. And again, with the blood and how you're cycling away the lands, I'm going to reiterate this a lot. Deadly Dispute allows us to just really increase the density of, Sanguine Brushstroke and being able to just kill your opponent, very consistently and very quickly. And so Deadly Dispute's really good with Shambling Ghast. Anyone who knows Shambling Ghast knows that this is a card that's really, really great in sack decks. It gives you mana, right, in the form of treasure, but also the -1/-1, specifically in Alchemy, is surprisingly relevant. There are a lot of creatures that you can, kill, or if your opponent attacks with a 2/2, you can just block with Shambling Ghast and then kill it with the triggered ability, right? So there's a lot of cool things to go around with Shambling Ghast. And I want to talk about Experimental Synthesizer in this deck, because how Experimental Synthesizer works, right, is enters the battlefield, you exile the top card, and you can play until end of turn. And when it enters the battlefield, or leaves the battlefield. And that's important because you can sacrifice it to Deadly Dispute, right? But Synthesizer, just like Deadly Dispute, just like the blood tokens, right? It is adding this, if everything in your deck is cycling, you're bound to draw what you need eventually, or rather quickly. And so Synthesizer is just a really good way to ensure that reliability, while also, providing something to sacrifice for Deadly Dispute, providing something to sacrifice with Oni-Cult Anvil, and so there's just a lot to do with it. And in the gameplay videos that we'll watch later, you can watch in the VODs, Experimental Synthesizer, I always feel like I am learning how to play with it a little better every single game. There's a lot of room for error and a lot of room for risk and reward. And do you Synthesizer knowing that you can only cast a 2-drop from the top of your library? Or do you wait to ensure that you could cast a 3-drop or one of your 4-drops, right? And there's a lot of payoffs, and sometimes in retrospect you always know if it was the right or wrong answer, but in the moment there's always these variables to judge and to look into. So that's what this is here for. So we have the 1-drops, and then we also have Voltage Surge. Now, Voltage Surge is a card that I recently just put 4 of into this deck. And the reason is we need instant speed removal to interact with, specifically right now, Diviner of Fate, which is a really, really strong Esper card going around. And you just need something that can reliably kill it the turn it enters the battlefield. And Voltage Surge can also kill Planeswalkers and a lot of other stuff. But right now we need main deck reliable removal at instant speed. And Voltage Surge, again with how this deck works, it can sacrifice a treasure token. It can sacrifice a blood token, which worked with Sanguine Brushstroke. We can also sacrifice an Experimental Synthesizer, right, to trigger the Leaves playability and gain another card to potentially do. And so I hope as you notice, a lot of these cards help with the other cards and making everything a little more efficient and having very minute combos, but they are there and everything helps each other. And that's really, really important to why I have made this deck the way it is. And so we'll finally talk about Oni-Cult Anvil as like kind of the main thing. Well, Bloodtithe Harvester is just really, really great. If you played Standard, you know it. But I really want to talk about Oni-Cult Anvil as this artifact that during your turn, if an artifact leaves the battlefield, you create a 1/1 construct. You can also sacrifice that construct or an artifact to drain your opponent for 1 damage. And this card does so much work in this deck. It is actually unbelievable. So again, whenever you use a blood or a treasure, you're getting a construct. Now remember, only once during your turn and only during your turn. But there are so many reliable ways to get it going. And once you get 1 or 2 Oni-Cult Anvils, they're just fulfilling each other. And you're creating an army of constructs. And it's just a card that is so seemingly not powerful, but when it gets going, it deals so much damage, but it only does that damage over, a long period of time, right? And so the Oni-Cult is in here because it's part of, unlike the Sanguine Brushstroke, where you can, deal 9 damage to your opponent, like, over the course of 2 turns. Oni-Cult is going to deal a little more incremental damage over time. And so when you play this deck, if an Oni-Cult hand is very different from a Sanguine Brushstroke hand in how, like, you want to play the game and how you really value the cards and different play patterns. And it's just something you really need to be cognizant of. And again, when that happens, we'll discuss it and talk about it later. But Oni-Cult requires you to be very, very attentive to the battlefield at large, because you need to really, really plan ahead of whether you're going to have disposable artifacts. There have been times where I've been a little careless or cavalier with using my treasure or, blooding away stuff, where if I just saved it for a turn or two, right, I would have stuff to sacrifice for Oni-Cult. But nothing is really more sad in this deck than playing an Oni-Cult Anvil when you have no other artifacts to get it going. You can always sacrifice itself to make a construct, but then you're just feels like you're wasting the card. And also, Oni-Cult is why, again, we have, the Bloodtithe Harvester and Voldaren Epicure, right? If they just interacted with the Sanguine Brushstroke, that probably wouldn't be enough. But having another way to use the blood, in this case, to sacrifice to Oni-Cult or to trigger Oni-Cult, is what ties everything together, right? And then I want to talk, I've been experimenting a lot with this deck, and you can see that in general with the decks I use and play. But I have one Valki, God of Lies, one Viconia, a Xander's Wake, and Prosper Tome-Bound in this deck. And you can look at usually a lot of my decks, right? And everything is usually a 4 of, a 4 of, a 4 of, and then, I have some fun and have a bunch of 1-ofs, right? And I like that because I feel like as a player, it gives me a little more options during the game. But also, like, as a deck designer, I like to be able to play around and have different things to do so that when I go to iterate down the line, I'm more informed. Like, now I know the different strengths of these different cards and why they're good and why they're not bad. And instead of removing them entirely, I keep them there so I can develop a slightly more informed opinion on them. So Xander's Wake is a card that triggers whenever a creature dies, and it's definitely good in different matchups. And I don't know how much I love it in a more aggressive metagame, right? You don't have a lot of time to get a lot out of Xander's Wake. If your creature's dying every turn and you're triggering it, fine, great, lovely. But if you don't have the time to cast it and you're just dead, well, you would have rather it been anything else. We also have Valki, which is kind of a cool, cute card. And again, it's good against aggressive strategies. You know what they have in their hand. You get rid of, a Diviner of Fates. And that's just wonderful. You can really disrupt different plans of different decks by removing that creature. But again, Valki is something that doesn't go into this deck's major, like, blood sacrifice plan. It's kind of just there. And so again, I don't know how much I love Valki or not, but it's been good enough for me to keep in the main deck, right? And same Viconia, there are a lot of different graveyard strategies or things that incrementally use the graveyard. And so Viconia has just been a really, really big help in a lot of those things. I'm never, like, that sad to see Viconia. And again, specializing and getting a copy, of a hasted Bloodtithe Harvester has happened more than once, right? So there's a lot of things to do with Viconia. And again, that's why I keep Viconia in here. And I haven't hated it enough to remove it entirely and to maybe go up to 2 Xander's Wake or another Valki. And I'm just testing it out. Same thing with Prosper, but Prosper I have 2 of. And Prosper is also very, very interesting here because Prosper costs 4 mana. And the more mana something costs in our deck, the better it has to be for us to include it, because Experimental Synthesizer, right, is a card that exiles the top card of your library, and you can only play it that turn. And you want to always be able to reliably do that. And with Prosper in the deck, we give ourselves 2 cards that we can't cast at 3 mana. And that doesn't seem like a lot, but it is, and it happens fairly often. So it is something to be cognizant of. But Prosper, I've found to be really, really powerful. There's not a lot of removal for it right now going around in the Alchemy metagame, and so it might change in the upcoming week. But a lot of times I've been able to cast Prosper, and it's just so much mana and card advantage that has really won me games that I should have never won before. And so I've been really, really liking this card a lot. Also, you know how I said Experimental Synthesizer doesn't want me to have a lot of high mana value cards? The cool thing with Prosper is it works really well with Experimental Synthesizer, because these cards you're playing from exile. And so if you have Prosper on the battlefield, and you Experimental Synthesizer, the card you cast or play from exile is going to get you another treasure. And so these 2 cards, Prosper works really, really well with Experimental Synthesizer, but not necessarily the other way around. And that's okay. We also have the sideboard, but again, I'll talk about that more in the matchups. But we're just playing around and seeing what is or isn't good with this deck. And yeah, we have Duress, Ray, Abrade, Graveyard Trespasser, Mind Spike, Go Blank, Sorin. I'm naming cards at this point. Invoke, and Will is an interesting card that I've been including and loving, and we will see why I like him down the line this week. But with all that being said, I hope you really liked this video. I love this deck so much, and again, I know we just talked about the deck building aspects of it, but this deck is something I made myself. It's how I got to #1 on the arena ladder and ended in February with a deck very similar to this. So it has a really, really soft spot in my heart for that, and I know it very well, and I'm very, very excited to show you how to play in a more in-depth way and explain my choices later on this week. Again, if you haven't already, you should totally follow, like, comment, or subscribe are great ways to support me in this channel. Again, you could watch this video or VODs of me playing this deck at twitch.tv/thenerdysteve, where I play live. You can talk and ask any question there. And yeah, I hope you have a wonderful morning, evening, or afternoon, wherever you are. And thank you so much for watching. Bye.